Hello and welcome to episode 193 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
And I'm 2024 James Whittingham. This week we look ahead to 2024 and pick the winners and losers. The winners appear to be BYD, the Chinese car-making company, and the losers appear to be Toyota and me, James Whittingham.
A warm winter leads to problems for ice rinks in Canada. Also a problem? The ice maker in my bomb shelter recording studio is on the fritz, so I can no longer sip margaritas while recording the show.
I explained why working on my family tree got me thinking about climate action. And it wasn't just because my lineage dates back to a rabid monkey in the last ice age.
The first EV with a sodium-ion battery has rolled off the assembly line in China. This is good news, but James can't drive one because the sodium levels in his bloodstream are so high, he just can't take the risk.
Oh, you have no idea. All that and more on this edition of the Clean Energy Show.
All right, well, congratulations and happy anniversary. We've been doing the show for about 4 years now, James. This is amazing.
I don't think it's our official anniversary yet. I think you're jumping the gun. I mean, I don't want anyone to send gifts and well wishes just yet, but I mean,
sure.
We're very close. We started just before the pandemic. And I often think that because, you know, it's really hard to start a podcast and get listenership, that we probably wouldn't have made it if it wasn't for the pandemic. If it wasn't for me needing something to do and needing someone to talk to every week, that we may not have survived. And then we did, and we've built up an audience and gotten, I think, a little bit better at this. In fact, we're so much better at this that I'm doing this on 2 hours sleep. If I hadn't done 193 episodes, I don't see how I'm actually impressed we've made it this far. You know, setting up all the camera equipment and the sound and everything. I wasn't sure it was going to work. And I just pumped some coffee into my veins because I had insomnia. I got up at 6:50 this morning, and I was up late last night doing something with my daughter, which I'll talk about in a second, but I stayed up a little too late, and then I got anxious about getting up in the morning. Then I was thinking about doing the CBC public radio interview, not once, but twice for two different cities. Based on my TikTok/Twitter video on comparing, you know, the Netherlands to our province, our Canadian province of Saskatchewan, and how we're not doing anything with solar, and we have so much better solar potential here than they do. Anyway, Brian, I feel worse than I've ever felt on the show. I almost thought about canceling it, but I've already delayed it once, and I didn't want to be that guy, and we're getting late in the week here, and people haven't heard us over the holidays in North America here, so I got to do something.
Yeah, it was a long break. And I do definitely want to ask you about that. I know you were on CBC radio locally here this morning talking about all that stuff. I didn't listen, and I don't want to, you know, I'm worried about your blood pressure because I know that this stuff makes you angry. And I don't think I could have done this kind of interview that you did because it does the same thing for me. It just, you know, we're in an era of such incredibly cynical politics. And what's happening with energy in our province is the most cynical politics I've ever seen in my entire life. And that's what you were there to comment on.
When I did the Saskatoon hit about 20 minutes later, I decided that I would calm down for it. And, you know, there are links on Twitter if you're interested in listening to this stuff, and we'll get them up and spread around. But, you know, I just felt like, you know, she called me a solar expert 3 times. I was too tired to challenge that. And I also knew how fast the time went in the first one, and I had some extra things I wanted to get in there. So I decided not to challenge it. She also said that I was the host of the Clean Energy Show. And I think they both said that, even though in the pre-interview they said, can we call you the co-host of the Clean Energy Show? And I said, yeah, that's right. That's fine.
Yeah.
And, you know, but, you know, all bets were off. I didn't know I could remember my name when I went in there this morning, so tired. I don't know how people do it, but if, you know, you're an early riser, you could have done a better job. But anyway, yes, it made me angry. And I used that. I thought overnight as I couldn't sleep, you know, I've had these opportunities many times before, but what should I use this opportunity for? And I'm just sick of the rhetoric that gets spread on Facebook and around the regular people just don't have a clue, and they believe all this crap about the stuff that we cover on the show. And I decided to artificially amp up the anger and just, you know, get emotional about it, because people should be that way. And this exposes their lies. For instance, they have, the Netherlands has 800 times, I'm going to need anger, Brian, to get through the show, by the way, just to keep me going, because my blood may just slow down to a trickle. Yeah, so the Netherlands is a tiny country that fits into Saskatchewan. You can see our TikTok video about that if you'd like. And it's a little bit more north than southern Saskatchewan, and it's certainly more cloudy. So we have, the same solar panel there doesn't do as well as the solar panel here, which gets 142% of what that panel gets. And they've got, gigawatts and gigawatts, and they're putting, 4 to 5 nuclear reactors worth of solar in. And we say that we can't do that. Because the sun, the reporter said the sun, it needs to be stored. We need a base load. Well, I called it horsepucky, boring from, good thing I didn't swear, but I borrowed that from MASH in the 70s, that term. I could have said baloney, but that's no fun. Yeah, so it's just a lie that we can't do solar. And their aim is to have solar at 8 or 9% of our grid. And it's already at 19% of the Netherlands grid in the first half of 2023. It was 19%. And that's 30 years before what they're hoping to get to 8 or 9%, because they say it's not possible. But the Netherlands is not the only country that proves this, but it certainly is an embarrassment to our utility, and it shows that they're either grossly incompetent or lying. What's your theory on that? Because I've been asked that both times.
Yeah, I wish there was a clear answer, but I feel like it's a little bit of both. Like people are just so emotionally attached to oil around here that they are not thinking clearly. Like people just assume that we have to have the fossil fuels because it's such a damn cold place. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but it's so cynical that it just makes me just sick to my stomach.
One of the projects I got into, it was funny because the other day, my son, who was home for Christmas at the time, came up to me at the couch as I was relaxing, as I'm apt to do, on the couch, fully reclined. And he gives me a notebook and a pen and says, write down everything you know about your family tree. And I was stumped because I don't know. My parents never told me anything. My dad died when I was 20. My mom didn't have a good relationship with me. So I know very little about my family tree. But 3 years ago, I tried doing it on this free website called WikiTree, which everyone sort of contributes to. So I went back to that and kind of looked around and started printing that off for him. And then I realized there was another one that was free that you don't have to pay $15 a month for, like Ancestry, called FamilySearch.org. Now that's run by the Mormon Church, but everyone says online. I looked around and they said they don't hassle you. They don't, they don't come to your door saying, I hear you have ancestors. Would you like to join us? Anything like that. So anyway, Brian, I typed in basically, if I got up to my grandparents, it opened up a whole can of worms that just kept going and going and going.
Wow.
I don't know. Have you done any of this?
Yeah, I do. I've made a couple of short films. I've made a bunch of short films about myself and growing up in Saskatchewan. A lot of that has family ancestry. And yeah, I actually know my heritage on both sides of my family back to the 1400s.
Yes, that's pretty much how, I don't know, maybe that's when they started keeping records or church records or stuff like that.
Could be, yeah.
But yeah, it didn't take actually a whole lot of work. The most of it was figuring out how I had this half uncle named Tex. And there's one guy that sort of caught my eye, and he's the guy who came from basically Germany via Switzerland. His name was Henry Mosier, the anglicized version of his name. And I always knew that this part of Nova Scotia where my mom was from and many generations of her family, there was actually a place there named after him. Now, I didn't know that place that we'd always talked about, I didn't know was named after my own family. But he came over as a Palatine migrant because they needed more Protestants. That's what the First Nations people needed, was more Protestants to come over.
Yeah.
So they brought his family over, and he came with his siblings, and he was really depressed about it. And he's got this sort of prayer that says, "Dear God, I'm at the ends of the world. Please take care of me. I don't know where I am. I miss everyone. It's hell here, but I know you're going to guide me." And it's on this sort of fracture, they call it, which is this sort of fabric thing with words and prayer. I think it's in an archive somewhere, but that was 300 years ago that he was born. So I got me to thinking, what are my descendants going to think of me when all the family tree will be very easy by then because there's so many documents. I assume, unless the world goes into anarchy, which seems possible. What are they going to think of me? And the fact is, they're going to be living in a climate change world 50, 100, 200, 300 years from now. And they're going to know that this was the time. They're going to know that this is the time that we knew fossil fuels were to blame for 75% of this problem, the burning of fossil fuels. And they'll also know that there were solutions that we had that we ignored. And brings me back to the whole, why isn't our government doing anything with solar? Why did I have more solar on my roof than they did 3 years ago? That doesn't make any sense. So I just thought that, I also thought that, there's these squabbles between our provincial government and the federal government, between the Premier Mo and Justin Trudeau. And I think, because, Mo likes oil and he thinks that Trudeau and my oil cousins think that he's trying to end the oil industry. Well, the fact is he hasn't done squat. In the eyes of my descendants, they're going to be one and the same. There's not going to be distinguishable. They're going to be two criminals who didn't act on something very important that they could have acted on. They didn't stand up to fossil fuels. And that's a shame. So, I mean, I'm no hero. I buy crap at the dollar store over Christmas for decorating and for filling in needs. But, at least I'm trying to educate people. At least I'm trying to set examples by buying electric vehicles, which is not easy for a guy with my income, my family's income. And it's not easy to get the solar on the roof. But, the Saskatoon host asked me, what about she was just in the Netherlands with her uncle, and her uncle was getting solar on his roof. And the reason is because electricity is so expensive there because of the war, and the fossil fuels are a lot more expensive there to burn for the grid. So electricity prices are high and they pay off in 3 years. It takes us, at least 3 times longer than that to pay off our solar panels here because electricity is cheap. It's gone gangbusters there. And, but she asked me, what about the cost? And I said, like you say, it's the capital cost. The sun is free. The fuel is free. The sun does not send us a bill every month saying, hey, you got some electricity from me. I will pay up, you son of a gun. It's not working that way. So yeah, it's infuriating. And it's not just where we live, although we're a good example because we have oil. And I mean, Montana is getting, I was reading about them. They're very right-wing, very libertarian. They have all kinds of wind energy going on down there. In fact, it's increasing, and then maybe it's just the way their grid is set up for more of a free market. Maybe ours should be too.
Yep. Well, that's one of the articles I wanted to talk about today. So Hannah Ritchie is somebody I follow on Substack, and she's a data scientist we've talked about before, and she always looks at the data when it comes to climate stuff, and she works for the website Our World in Data.
Yeah.
And so she posted a recent thing that explains how Republican states, the red states in the U.S., are often the strongest on wind and solar. And it's partly to do that they're in the middle of the country. For whatever reason, the left-right split in America is that, the red states, the Republican states tend to be down the middle. The blue states, the Democrats tend to be on the coasts. But that's Wind Alley, right? So that's where the wind resources are the best. So, she's got stats here that, really the 5 biggest states for wind power are Republican states: Iowa, South Dakota, Kansas, Oklahoma, North Dakota. They've gone huge on wind. And this relates very much to, your interview on CBC about our government, because the difference is that we still have an old-fashioned government monopoly for our utility grid. And with very limited small exceptions, you can put small amounts of power onto the grid. You and I both have rooftop solar. They do allow, under certain circumstances, you can put up a small solar farm and connect it to the grid, but it's very restricted, and it's basically a 99% government monopoly for our power. And so the difference is that these Republican states, their politicians could go ahead and just slam, clean energy and say, we support coal, we support oil. But because it's more of a free market for power, then the solar and the wind just gets built anyway, because it's a good economic decision. This is not being done in these red states because people are worried about climate change. It's been done because it's an excellent economic decision, and the landowners love it. Putting up wind turbines on your farm is an excellent way because, you'd lose very little ground and you get very stable income from it, more stable than, a lot of farming is. So, but, the difference around here, because we still own, a government monopoly on the utility, they've decided to politicize that. so they can't do the rhetoric on one hand and say, oh, fossil fuels are great and solar power is bad, and then go build a bunch of solar. They actually have to follow through with what they're talking about. And since they're the ones in control, they can do that.
It's just, it's such a frustrating place to live right now. And you look at how the rest of the world is moving forward, how we're getting left behind, and how the politicians here in the oil provinces think that it's going to last forever. Well, they're in for a rude awakening, and it could come this year, it could come in 5 years. It's going to come, and they're going to be down in the dirt asking questions. So,
well, it's something we've been talking about for 4 years now on the podcast. Well, two things sort of came to mind is the fact that our oil economies in our province and in Alberta, we're expecting those to collapse at some point because of, the demand for oil. Hasn't happened yet. We've been doing the podcast for 4 years. So either we're idiots and it's never going to happen, or hopefully it happens before
I've
the
seen
end
some
of the podcast.
forecasts. They're looking at a plateau in China this year, and China is often mentioned as a growing economy, and it's going to go forever, and that's going to boost some of our growth. Well, maybe in natural gas for a while, but not in gasoline for transportation and diesel.
But Toyota is the other thing I think about, because we often talk about Toyota because they're laggards in switching to EVs, but it still hasn't come to bite them either. They're still the largest automaker in the world. So again, we've been complaining about them for 4 years, and I assume we'll be proven correct at some point. But, maybe there's people who have been listening to us for 4 years and thinking that we're idiots for mispredicting that.
Well, look at BYD taking over as the number one pure EV maker in the world now. Tesla had a reign for 6 or 7 years. Before that, it was Nissan, I think, for selling really not that many Leafs. But now the BYD is looked at as becoming perhaps the largest automaker in the world by 2030. And who's to say they're not? And how is Toyota going to fit into that, Brian?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's lots of people that I still think Toyota's going to be fine. Toyota thinks they're still going to be fine, but at a certain point, it's going to bite them. I'm just not sure when.
And some of the other automakers, I mean, GM seems to be stumbling. They seem to be at the forefront. Volkswagen seem to be at the forefront, but they're stumbling. They have not done a great job at rolling out all their EVs, and they've run into problems.
Yeah, all right. I want to talk about ice. So, I don't know if you remember this, but around 20 years ago, there were a lot of stories in the Canadian news about hockey legend Wayne Gretzky.
Okay.
The most successful hockey player in history. And he grew up in Brantford, Ontario, Canada. And about 20 years ago, there was a lot of stories on the news. I think it was his father, Walter Gretzky, talked to the press and said, hey, we can't make a backyard ice rink anymore.
Oh.
Part of the reason Wayne Gretzky became the greatest hockey player of all time was his dad would make a rink for him every year in the backyard in Brantford, Ontario. And, as of 20 years ago, this was kind of no longer the case. It was getting too difficult to make a natural ice rink in Brantford. And now the problem has moved to where we are, to Saskatchewan. It's getting hard to make, at least this winter, as you know, has been particularly mild. But we've got a couple of stories here about, the problems regarding ice. So a lot of small towns, I mean, fewer, ice can be made artificially, of course, with ice making machines that, pipes that run refrigerant under the ice. And I remember being surprised by that when I lived in Toronto, because they have a bunch of outdoor ice rinks in Toronto, but they're all artificial. Like, it's not cold enough in Toronto.
Like Manhattan, Rockefeller Center there.
30 Rockefeller Plaza. That would be artificial ice. But we still have rinks left here. And I used to put a backyard rink in every year when my kids are young. Our backyard is big enough. I could put a decent sized ice service. It was a ton of work. I did it for about 10 years.
That's pretty impressive, actually. I did it 1 year when I was a kid. And I'm still recovering from it. So it was a lot of work.
No, and I remember 1 year it snowed like every 2 days. And I was out there shoveling, and there was so much shoveling. It just was driving me crazy. But there's still a handful of indoor natural ice rinks in Saskatchewan in these small towns. They've built a very basic barn, and it's got an ice surface. But this year is so warm, they're having difficulty getting the ice to freeze properly, which is a real shame. And these small communities mentioned in this article from CBC, they're very small towns, so it would be very difficult for them to get the money together for artificial ice rinks. But It's a real shame, and that problem from Brantford, Ontario, is now moving across all the way here in Saskatchewan, where it gets, usually the coldest.
And we did end up having officially a brown Christmas here because there wasn't 2 centimeters of snow or approximately a little less than an inch, which is required. But it was mostly bare, except on in the shade where there was a little bit of snow remaining. But it did snow last night. I noticed a little bit. And you know what? I went out to a provincial park a few days ago with the family, and they wanted to go ice skating out there on these kind of like where the campground roads were. They put in sort of ice loops, and they were doing fine. There was no cross-country skiing, though. They usually have cross-country skiing there, apparently. Not enough snow for that. So it was cold enough to make ice, but only a few days ago. I mean, usually around where we live, the date for ice opening is earlier, at worst mid-December. So it's just been, it's not necessarily climate change, but this is the worst El Nino year we've had, the warmest, driest, and that's going to cause problems. And although those patterns do occur, they're getting more strong and more worse from climate change. And unless we get a big soaking here in western half of North America, it's going to be a smoky, crappy summer again. I don't want that.
Yeah, because it's just too dry. So we're going to end up with all those forest fires. But anyway, that led me to another story on CBC. Northern Saskatchewan residents concerned about supplies as ice roads are delayed by the warm winters. So there's a TV show called Ice Road Truckers. Have you ever seen that?
I've seen clips and certainly have heard of it a lot. Yeah.
In remote northern communities, they often use ice roads to get trucks in because there isn't necessarily proper.
So in the summer,
highway.
Is there ferries in some places and ice roads in the winter, or then there's sort of that lag between the ferry closing and the thing freezing enough for trucks?
I don't know exactly. And, every community's probably a little bit different. But anyway, so in northern Saskatchewan, in lots of northern places, they rely on ice roads, which are only usable, passable in the winter. They build them up with, over top of like lakes and stuff. I don't really know anything about it. And I should probably watch the Ice Road Trucker show to know more about it. But according to this article, and these roads are run by the Ministry of Transportation, like the same, entity that takes care of our other roads in the province. And they have 230 kilometers of ice roads.
Wow. That's a lot of connections to society.
It's crazy. And so typically they run till around March 31st. Just depends on the weather. But again, like the outdoor ice rinks, they're having problems where so this article did come out on December 21st, so it's a while ago, but the ice was only, what did it say, 8 inches thick, and they needed to be, 31 or something like that. But, so the problem is that these communities, they need things like fuel. Like we've often discussed on the show, remote northern communities often run off of diesel generators. And if the ice roads don't come in, they literally have to fly in fuel, which is incredibly expensive. And, they don't want to do that.
And you have to think that this is going to happen more and more and more. Like regardless of what happens, it's going to get worse.
Yeah, we've been relying on these ice roads, just like Wayne Gretzky was relying on his backyard rink. And we're just going to have to change strategies. Like it's not a sustainable thing. So, as of December 21st, the ice was only about 8 inches thick. It needs to get about 20 inches before these ice roads are reliable. And, carrying in fuel is the most expensive thing. And they will literally have to fly it in. It said during the pandemic, they had to fly in some fuel. It cost $24,000 for one flight that had 10 barrels of fuel. 200 liters for each of these barrels of fuel, $24,000.
Is that for the generators then?
Yeah, for the generators.
Then these people have got to look at something else. For all, if you get a sunny day in the winter and it's not great here where we live, but I mean, you could at least turn off the generator for a few hours or turn it down or whatever and prolong your diesel just from solar, which is so easy to install and so fast.
I mean, it'd be nice if there was a rail line or something like that, but
we live in a vast province, Brian. It's huge. It's this giant rectangular like place with 652,000 square. kilometers, 15 Netherlands fit in our province, 15 of them.
Yeah, which brings us back to the discussion of our electrical grid. It really makes sense that we have a government monopoly on our electrical grid because of how it was built, because we have such a sparse population spread out over a large area that there's no way it would have been an economical business to wire up every farmhouse in Saskatchewan. Like every farmhouse in Saskatchewan got electricity in the 30s or 40s, something like that. I mean, it was an incredible expense that never would have made sense for a private company in all these northern communities as well. So they could choose to go green with their monopoly. They just choose not to.
Yeah, and most of us live near the U.S. border, as is the case for most of Canada. There's just miles and miles and hours, and there's no roads that go up there, period, of any kind, that go to the north, where it borders the Northwest Territories. It goes all the way up there. But I was surprised to see that even at our northern border, which no one goes to, I don't think a human has hardly been there. You can probably count them on your fingers.
Yeah.
They have better solar there than all of the best part of Germany. 10% better. And, Germany has gone crazy with solar 15, 20 years ago. And they were the leader. They sort of got it going. Then the Chinese took over with the manufacturing and put them out of business. But they got started early. And we certainly could have put up at least one couple of solar panels on our grid, for gosh sakes.
And as far as the transportation goes, every once in a while, somebody brings up the idea of airships like Zeppelins, that maybe that's the solution, that we could, haul stuff up there by airship. I don't know.
Well, it's not happening. I mean, people are still working on the airships and it's not happening, but maybe.
Yeah.
I think electric drones will one day probably be able to do it. You put in
it's a very long distance.
A couple recharging stations along the way, Brian, set up with a solar and the battery, just like they would set up a cell tower somewhere, and you could have a little bit of infrastructure in the middle of nowhere. I'm not solving problems here, but I do know the drones are and just vertical takeoff aircraft or electric powered are going places for sure.
No, that's a great idea.
Let's look ahead to 2024, shall we? I've got some quick looks here from various people who are experts in this. I'm not an expert. I'm just a presenter. I mean, if the world was made up of cats, I think I could be considered an expert on pretty much everything, but it's not. Climate scientists hail 2023 as the beginning of the end for fossil fuels. And there's cautious optimism among experts that emissions from energy use may have peaked as net zero emission intensifies around the world. That's from The Guardian. And of course, we mentioned that BYD was now ahead. They're taking off. I don't think a lot of people are taking them seriously. Musk laughed them off a few years ago. But Warren Buffett invested in them in 2008, I think, but then he's since divested. I don't understand why, but it's certainly a lot of growth coming. And I see some EV culture wars continuing. Do you see that? Like it seems like it's going to continue for a while. Like it may even be affecting sales for all I know.
Yeah. Still a lot of misinformation out there about EVs.
Yeah, we got the U.S. election coming up, and we all know how the bad guy feels about windmills and electric vehicles. And there was something on Twitter this morning about the guy who's probably going to be the next Prime Minister of Canada on the Conservative Party, saying that lightning comes out of the sky. The electricians have found ways to get lightning out of the sky. What the hell? The hell is that?
Okay.
I mean, if that's the guy running the country, my God. China's passenger new energy vehicle retail sales were up 34% year on year. They're already leading the world, and they're up 34%. That's up 10% just from the same period last month.
Yeah, and this is the biggest car market in the world.
BYD is leading. Tesla's about a third of that, and Li Auto is about half of Tesla. And they, I think, are known for their smaller cars. So solar panel prices, they just plummeted this year, the materials that go into solar panels, as did batteries, because the supply chain sort of caught up to demand. So solar panel prices are down 30 to 40% last year. And the U.S., they're down less because they have such tariffs on them. They were only down 15%. And by 2030, the world is set to have far more manufacturing capacity. This is from an analyst. for solar PV than it is deploying. And based on today's policies and settings. So, you know what that means? It means that the price is going to fall out of them. You know, prices fall for various reasons, but oversupply has been a big one. And China has oversupplied the world for better or worse. And that's allowed us to have this incredible solar revolution that has taken place and continues to. And we could jump on that bandwagon here, just suggesting that. So it looks like solar could be, it's hard to say for the long term, but it seems like it's going to be really cheap this year. And so we could see huge solar deployment, or at least, projects started. As far as automation, driving automation, where do you see us at there? Because I'm pretty cynical about it. I mean, Cruise has been shut down and suing people,
Yep.
and Tesla doesn't seem to have made much of progress that's even worth talking about. Are we going slow on this or what?
Yeah, I don't see much of an improvement this year. It's very, very slow progress.
So the production capacity for lithium-ion type batteries will reach 1.5 terawatt hours in 2024, and that's going to be an increase of 42%. That's incredible.
In 1 year.
In one year. And it seems to me that, grid storage is an infinite appetite for, batteries, even though they're pretty expensive now. There seems to be, because it solves so many problems. I forgot to mention this. This morning, my power went out after I was dissing the utility at public radio. And it actually crossed my mind. What's up with that? Well, it came back on in 5 minutes, fortunately. But, the batteries stabilize the grid. And so do virtual. I think that's going to be a big thing. Virtual power, where people, maybe even EVs this year, but it's not working out very well with the EVs, so expensive equipment. But people who do have batteries, and it's not necessarily financially feasible to do that in most markets, but some places it is, and you can have these virtual power plants where you sell electricity, when they need it the most. They'll pay big bucks, to have that from tripping equipment or breaking things or having blackouts. So this analyst says the problem is we don't need that many batteries yet. The factory utilization rates will fall from 80% to 74%. So there'll be a huge surplus after that utilization. So they're not going to be terribly profitable. In other words, we're building so many gigafactories, we're building too many of them, this analyst said.
Yeah, because you also need to be building the things that those batteries go into, which is either EVs or grid storage or home storage or whatever. So yeah, I could see there being an imbalance where you're making too much of one and not enough of another.
So he goes on to say, what about LFP? Lithium iron phosphate was the story of 2023, but surprisingly, nickel, cobalt, manganese, NCM, is still holding its own. In Europe and North America, most EVs want a real-world range of 300 miles. That's about 500 kilometers for inner-city trips, and that's still NCM territory, says Andy Leland. He's an analyst, supply chain analyst for lithium-ion batteries. So lithium-ion battery supply chain will have an overabundance, and that will fall, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing when battery prices fall, even if they're not the EV batteries, because then they get into the grids. And once you get some momentum, once you get things going, holy cow, it's going to take off.
Yeah, we just have to keep up production, which sort of brings us to the next story, which is sodium-ion batteries, which we have mentioned on the show before. Sodium-ion is another formulation for batteries, and the main benefit, as I understand it, is that it's cheaper. I mean, you're using kind of salt instead of some of the other components. And these batteries do very well at low temperatures. So, they could be good for
Very interested in that, Brian. Very interested.
Yeah.
I think, though, that's going to be a while before they bring it to us and I've said it before, we are a population that lives in one of the, coldest places in the world that has a population, excluding places in Russia, which don't count.
Yeah. So, they should be good in low temperatures. They should have really good charging speeds, maybe longer lifespans.
Yes.
And cheaper raw materials. So they're cheaper to make. So the first car with a sodium ion battery is now coming off the assembly line in China. It's the JAC Group, which is a company that's half owned by Volkswagen and half owned by the Chinese government. And it's kind of a smaller car with, not a particularly huge battery. But the fact that these are, it just seemed like we were, talking about sodium ion batteries only weeks ago or months ago on the podcast. And here they are
Well, they
already in a
said they were
car.
going to put it into a car this year, and by God, they did.
Yeah.
Because
By God,
that's
they
kind
did.
of the problem with these things. They don't always make it to production. You can't mass produce them.
Sure.
There's a problem with them. Well, things are so powerful in the battery world now that, they're just doing it. They're just doing it. They're these huge companies, and they're coming up with something, and it's boom, it's there, it's in the product. And
Yeah.
it's less energy dense, right? But that's perfect for grid storage too. And if it lasts longer, then your cost per kilowatt of storage goes way down.
Yeah, there's just so much money to be made, basically, in terms of batteries, that everybody's trying all kinds of different formulations. And then, yeah, the trick is, well, can it be something that's mass produced? Because the batteries that are being mass produced now are basically good enough to power the world on clean energy, and will still last a long time. And they're only going to get better from here. They've just got to be tested and proven before they get to actual production. But sodium, man, that came on quick.
Yeah, 2023 was an amazing year for batteries, and it took, I think, a lot of people by surprise, including the people who spend their lives doing this and get their paychecks for analyzing this sort of thing. Because,
Yeah.
they're not sending out press releases in advance. We think we might be able to do this. It just happens. And that's where we are. We knew this would happen one day. Let's take a quick look, Brian, before we move on, of all the EVs that are coming in 2024. When we first started this show 4 years ago,
Yeah.
it was really easy to keep track of all the EVs available in North America.
That's right. Yeah.
Now, my brain is full of information. It is at capacity. I cannot, I'm not even going to cover all of them. I'm just going to dip through them.
Yeah, whole manufacturers that we've never even mentioned on the show that I always think, oh, well, there's Volvo. We've never mentioned Volvo, I don't think. They've got some decent EVs coming out. So yeah, lots of players. It's encouraging.
I get less enthusiastic about the expensive ones, so I'm going to skip over most of them. But Acura does have the ZDX, small SUV. It shares components with the Cadillac Lyriq, so they've teamed up with GM on that. The Audi A6 e-tron, another luxury car. Speaking of luxury, 5 Bentley models. Bentley's going hard on EVs. That'll be pricey. The Buick Electra, is another one. Cadillac Celestiq, weirdly long car, built by hand and costing, get this, $300,000. I just thought I'd mention a Cadillac built by hand costing $300,000, which is...
Yeah, that's weird.
That's stupid and weird. But the Equinox EV is probably one of the most important vehicles that come out this year. This is from Chevy. It is a small crossover. There's plenty of market in North America for this vehicle and other places, including China and Europe. So that's an important EV because it was set to start at 30,000, and then they said 35,000 US, but then they also extended the range on it and included the destination fees. The Silverado EV pickup trucks are important. They have to do it right. They have to market it right. So that's important. We could start to see a few of those. The Dodge Charger. So that's, the chosen everyman's race car, sporty car, muscle car going EV, which has upset those people. So we'll see how that does. The Fiat 500e, smaller car, of course. Fiat's got some great EVs. The Fisker Ocean. Haven't talked much about Fisker, have we? But people are liking
No, they're actually making cars and selling them.
And the Ocean is getting really, really good reviews. Some people are saying it's the best EV they've tested. The Ford Explorer, that's kind of like the Equinox. It's a small SUV, very popular in North America. So that's going to EV. That's coming out. Now, keep in mind, a lot of these will be, just the tip of the ramp of production that could happen sometime in the calendar year, and we might not see a huge change in the marketplace. Like, the Chevy, they've delayed their Equinox, and they've had problems with their Blazer, which came out last year, and this hasn't ramped up production. They've actually stopped production on it because they've had problems with it. The GMC Sierra EV, which is, I believe, more of a luxury pickup, more of a premium anyway. The Honda Prologue SUV.
Yep, Honda's been a laggard.
Well, hopefully they'll come up with something. The Hyundai Ioniq 7. You excited about that one as a Hyundai fan?
Yeah, I love Hyundai. Hyundai Kia are doing great. Lots of EVs.
The Jeep Recon Wagoneer S. So Jeep is getting on board. That is, what's that car company owned by SAIC? Lucid Gravity. Lucid's coming out with more cars. Polestar's coming out with new cars, the 3 and 4, the Polestar 3 and 4. Mini has got the Countryman as well coming out. Porsche Macan is coming out. That's an expensive car. Not going to sell that many of them, but it gets people's attention and moves the transition along. Ram 1500 Rev hybrid power, which I think is a great way to approach electric trucks right now, because if you want them for towing, you've got a backup engine, but you still have a full EV because it only runs on EV power and it gets charged by the engine and not anything else.
Yep.
So you'd have electric heat and heat pump heat and so forth, and all the power and torque you want. The Toyota Tacoma EV, which I haven't even heard that they were coming out with that. I don't think anyone takes them all that serious yet. So they're trying to come out with that. We'll see if it happens. Volkswagen ID7 and ID Buzz are supposed to hit the streets. We've been waiting for the Buzz forever, haven't we? Practically since the day one of the podcast.
I think it's out in Europe now, but taking forever. Volkswagen tends to do their stuff in Europe first.
VW ID Space Vision with Z's and Z's in there instead of S's. Wagon. So wagon, I think they're bringing that to North America, and wagons are not popular here. And this is big. The Volvo EX30, well-reviewed, small SUV, priced fairly well. Not as well as I would like. It's no Bolt price, but it is...
and Volvo's a pretty expensive brand, so good for them for getting it down as low as they did.
It's a nice vehicle for the money. Let's put it that way. That's what reviewers are saying. Also, Volvo's coming out with the XC60 and 90 and the Kia EV3, which is small. So that may be competing with the Niro or replacing the Niro, something like that.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but certainly their lineup. And then the big news, January 1st, is the point of sale price reduction in the U.S. So if you're in the U.S., chances are you can get that $7,500, which was a tax credit, is now going to be a point of sale. I don't know if they're still calling it a tax credit, but if you're in the U.S. and you're buying an EV, chances are you can get the $7,500 price reduction at point of sale. You don't have to apply for it.
I wish they'd done that a long time ago, because it's that's what we have in Canada, and I wouldn't have. Would have had to borrow more money and pay off the loan, and to get the car. But now you don't have to borrow that extra money. It's your payments are low. However, though, there's a lot of them that you're only getting part of that $7,500. Because they're not all built in the States, and there's a lot of restrictions that some are not qualifying for, like anything that's built in Japan or Korea.
Yeah,
but some of these people, like Hyundai, are planning plants for the United States. So and
we've tried to cover it on the show, like which cars are eligible and whatnot, but it seems to change a lot. And so if you're doing your shopping, you'll just have to do your own research. And then, of course, depending on where you live, different states have different incentives as well. So you can sometimes stack those up and get a really good deal on an EV, but it'll have to be up to you to do that research for wherever you live. All right, so from The Guardian. So there is a Swedish company that wants to become the Spotify of heat pumps in the UK. So the idea being here of the subscription model. And we have seen this in solar. I feel like it was kind of a buzzy thing in solar in the US, a couple of years ago, 3 years ago.
People thought it was going to take off, and it didn't.
Yeah, I'm not sure it did. But the idea being that heat pumps can be quite expensive as an upfront cost. For a lot of people, they're going to save you money in the long run, but that upfront cost can be very difficult for a lot of people, as it was for solar. So again, the same idea was that there were companies that would put up the solar on your house for free, and then you just have some kind of a split with them for, the power.
I think they would even take it off if you moved, like they would,
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe you had to pay a fee, but they would do that, and I thought that was kind of weird.
Yeah, so in this particular case, the company is called Era. And if you move, then you can then pass the contract on to the house. That's how they've decided to do it, is that you can pass the contract on to the person that you're selling the house to, or you can buy it out and, I guess, remove it or something too. But yeah, so the idea is that this is largely for the UK. The UK is going to need to put in a lot of heat pumps. In the next few years, there's approximately 25 million gas boilers in the UK. They typically use boilers to heat their homes. And this is about 16% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the UK coming from all of
That's
these
a lot
boilers.
of boilers that could be replaced. So that's a lot of potential.
They have to be replaced.
Yeah, they have to.
They will definitely have to be replaced at some point. So they've also, the UK government has added some incentives lately. So there's money that you can get back on heat pumps, replacing your boiler. So again, if you're in the UK, you'll have to look into that. But yeah, this plan from this company is, aiming to kind of accelerate all this because of those huge upfront costs. So I thought this part was interesting too. As part of the plan, this company is going to invest £300 million in the next 3 years in a series of academies across the US, the UK.
Really?
Which it predicts will produce an 8,000 strong army of skilled installers for all of these heat pumps. So you do need skilled installers for these heat pumps. So it's not just a matter of, making the heat pump and selling it. You got to have, an army of people ready to deploy them. So they think 8,000 people can be trained and deployed.
So essentially, they're going to be plumbers and HVAC specialists as well. There's just not enough of them around, and they want to just increase that. Yeah,
and we've never gone through a sort of an upgrade of this scale before, and of course, we need to do it quickly. The quicker we can do it, the quicker that we can, tackle climate change. And then another quick story here from Electrek. I think that we had probably talked about this before. It's the world's longest undersea interconnector cable, and it has now come online. And this is an undersea power cable between the UK and Denmark. This is massive, 475 miles long, not kilometers, miles. So that's probably 600 kilometers under the sea, and it's connecting the UK and Denmark, and they're going to trade clean power. It says that they're so far apart that one of the reasons for this will be to make use of, say, excess wind power, but the two countries are so far apart, it says that it likely won't be windy at the same time in both places.
That's what we need to do. I mean, it's easier underwater than it is across land when you have to put up power, corridors and things. But that's one thing that I'm very optimistic and excited about is undersea sharing interconnections.
Interconnections between various countries and provinces. But yeah, they're so far apart. They're basically in different weather systems, it sounds like. So it sounds like it makes for a good, when one place is windy, maybe the other one's not going to be windy. So this is going to save, a lot of money, and it's going to, result in carbon emissions. They're saying around 600,000 tons of carbon emissions reduced from this because they'll be able to trade clean energy back and forth whenever they want to. So like taking 280,000 cars off the road, and it just opened. It's now working. It's sort of working at about half capacity now, and they're planning to ramp it up to full capacity.
Yeah, it's 800 megawatts now, and it's going up to 1.4 gigawatts. Or that's 1.4 nuclear reactors constant. We're not talking solar nameplate here. We're talking constant output. That's a lot of power from one cable, if it is one cable, or if it's a series of cables. I don't know how it works, but that's a lot of power for one line. And that's fantastic.
Yep. No, and Denmark and the UK have both gone pretty strong on wind and solar. So it's great news.
Yeah. And if you're new to the show, I mean, we've talked about Singapore connecting to Australia. They're working on that. They haven't started yet. There's, I believe, Morocco on North Africa going to the UK possibly, and Europe.
Yeah.
Those are longer distances, but it's possible to do. And then also Quebec down to New York City, Quebec, Canada, down taking their...
Yeah, I think that's been going on in some capacity for a while now.
Well, let's open the mailbag, shall we? We have just a little one here. It says, "Hey, Brian." Yeah, what am I, chopped liver? I had another letter from a publicist the other day that was like, "Hi, Barry and Brian." Completely got it wrong. That's how I know you're not actually listening to the show when you pretend you are. Just listening to your latest podcast episode, and I thought I'd help you out with the word uncloudy. It's called sunny.
LOL.
Like your friend Sunny. Keep up the great work. From Michael in Montreal. Thank you, Michael. And I want to take this opportunity to thank the people who donated. It seems like the holidays are the time when people get generous with the Clean Energy Show. And I just sincerely grateful to the very generous gifts that you've given us, donated to help the show keep going. It means a lot to us, and we're very grateful for that.
And how does one donate to the show, James?
Well, you go to the show notes, Brian, and you click on the link. That's a PayPal link, and you can set up a monthly thing or a one-time thing at Christmas, and try to put socks on my kids during the cold season, that type of thing. It's all there for you to do anytime you like. It's time for the lightning round.
The lightning round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy, and transportation.
From Bloomberg, the frequency of earthquakes in West Texas declined in 2023 for the first time in at least half a decade after regulators cracked down on the practice of burying toxic wastewater from oil drilling. The Texas section of the Permian Basin oil field recorded 194 quakes last year. And that's good. It's a 10% drop.
So let me get this straight. Burying toxic wastewater was previously legal?
Well, they're doing it less. It's still legal. They're just, try to keep it down, guys.
So if I've got some toxic wastewater, I take it to Texas.
Absolutely, absolutely. Tesla deliveries have met estimates, but falls behind BYD in sales. That's a big shift this year, right?
Yeah, Tesla actually beat them for the full year, but in the last quarter of the year, BYD is now ahead, just over 500,000 for BYD and just under 500,000 for Tesla. But it's all good news for electric vehicle adoption.
From PV Magazine, Solar Philippines begins working on a 4-gigawatt solar park. Talk about your big solar parks. That's huge.
Wow.
Solar Philippines says it has broken ground on what it touted to be the world's largest solar array. 4 gigawatts spread across 3,500 hectares. Time for a CES Fast Fact. Uruguay gets over 90% of its electricity from renewables. Renewable energy, by the way, creates wealth and prosperity. Uruguay has the highest per capita GDP in South America from Clean Technica. You do things right, it pays off. You stubborn, hanging on to 20th century energy, you're going to get screwed in the long run. In rural Virginia, a solar apprenticeship program gives high school students the chance to learn the skills of solar installation. We're talking about heat pumps in the UK. Well, this is getting them right in high school. And not only does it give them apprenticeship skills, it's giving them $17 an hour, which ain't bad. For Virginia, for a high school student, I would say.
And I think Virginia is one of those places transitioning away from things like coal. So this is a great replacement.
Ooh, it's time for another CES Fast Fact. Almost 1 in 4 animals raised on a factory farm never actually makes it to your plate, Brian. 1 in 4.
What happens to them?
I don't know. They run away.
I don't know.
They get wasted. I imagine they get wasted. Spain to close all 7 of its nuclear reactors between 2027 and 2035 and replace them with wind, water, solar renewables. And that's going to cost $22.4 billion to shut them down. Perhaps we'll talk more about that.
To shut them down, yeah. $22 billion.
And that price never gets mentioned when you're talking about nuclear, the shutting down part.
Yeah.
It's always like, it'll cost this much per kilowatt hour. Just let us build the plant. But the getting rid of the waste to the tearing it down to decommissioning, very expensive. From the Sunday Times of all people, electric cars' dead battery breakdowns hit a record low, according to them. So there's less dud batteries out there. Time for some nuclear news. Tokyo Power's massive 8-gigawatt I'm too tired for this. Let's just call it the KK nuclear reactor is looking at restarting. That will put a dent in LNG demand. That's good, says Reuters. And you know what? I'm happy for that. I mean, not a nuclear fan, but keeping existing going seems like a good idea, especially when we can stop burning LNG, liquid natural gas, for that. UK greenhouse gas emissions fall to half of peak levels. The first G20 nation to reach this milestone, according to The Spectator. GM, as I mentioned earlier, has issued a stop sale order on the Chevy Blazer EV following a week of reports about breakdowns. And it's largely to do with software, but it's not like a laggy screen. It's like your car quits. It's just not working.
Yeah, that's not good.
And this is hilarious. This is from The Sun. The headline is, "Let's Revolt." It's That's re-volt. It's dangerous, locals say, as electric car charging station blocked over fears it will become a hotbed for crime. So the locals have gotten, the sun readers have gotten and blocked the station because they convinced it's going to be a hotbed for crime to charge your EV. They say sex workers will flock there because you're stuck with 20 minutes of charging. Things will go down. So apparently,
interesting.
EV charging stations will attract sex workers and become hotbeds for crime. Not remotely true, of course. And
I guess I've been doing my EV charging all wrong.
I do worry about people, being stuck to their charge cable and not being able to peel away if some no good person comes along and tries to rob you or do bad things to you. I don't know. That is a concern. That's why you have to, if you're alone, pick your EV charging stations. It doesn't happen. It's more theoretical than being a problem, I guess. Pick well-lit EV stations in busy areas if you can, if you're charging at night. Oh, and finally this week from Energy Choice Matters. Competitive electricity generation prices in Philadelphia are lower than 27 years ago. They are 12% lower in nominal dollars and about 50% lower in constant dollars. Generation rate was 8.2 cents per kilowatt hour in 1996 and 8.9 cents or less 27 years later. Isn't that amazing?
So adjust for inflation, it's cheaper now. That's amazing.
27 years ago, electricity generated statewide in Pennsylvania was enormously polluting, with more than 50% of it coming from burning coal. And that sickened and killed tens of thousands every year and worsened climate change. But coal got priced out because of renewables. So coal plants cannot compete with the competitive electricity market and have been closing, reducing coal generation to just 15% of their electricity grid and shrinking fast. And that's what renewables do. They price out the bad things and life gets better and people start dying, Brian.
That is always good to hear. It is, that's it for this week. You can contact us at cleanenergyshow@gmail.com and around social media. We are Clean Energy Pod.
Don't forget to check out our YouTube channel and Twitter and TikTok and other places if you want to see the video we talked about earlier, which was separate from our show, more of a commentary video from me. And have a look at the Clean Energy store. We got merchandise. We got shirts flying off the shelves. I'm just saying that. I have no idea how sales are going. I should look into that. But yes, people have bought them. You've bought them. Apparently, they're soft and refreshingly cozy to wear. If you're new to the show, remember to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you get new episodes delivered every week. We do this every week. We took a week off last week. We apologize for that. I know you missed us. We missed you. Thanks again for your Christmas donations and Happy New Year to all of our listeners. We really appreciate you, and thanks for coming on this wild ride with us. See you again next week.
Yeah, Happy New Year, everyone, and see you next week.